Welcome to the third tutorial in our R series, and in this tutorial we're going to look at objects. And particularly we're going to look at two objects. First we're going to look at vectors, and we're going to do that in this tutorial, and then in the next tutorial we will look at a second very important type of object, which is a data frame. So to understand what objects are, and eventually what functions are, let's think of R as a language, which it is. Now, in a normal human language, such as English, we'd think about languages having components such as nouns and verbs. So nouns are people, places, things, etc. Verbs are action. So if we have a sentence such as Yoda levitates an X-Wing fighter, there are a couple of nouns in the sentence, of course. So Yoda is a noun, and X-Wing fighter is a noun. And then our verb, of course, is levitate. And so notice that in this particular sentence, nouns can be in different places of the sentence. So the sentence can start with a noun, but nouns can also be the subject of actions. Now in R also has objects and functions, and objects are analogous to nouns, whereas functions are sort of analogous to verbs. So in our sentence over here, an object would be the X-Wing fighter and Yoda, and functions would be a verb, such as levitate. But the idea behind R is that it's a function-driven language, and so it's the functions that are sort of controlling what happens to the nouns and what nouns do what. And so we usually think of functions in R as starting first. So if we were to write our sentence above in a more R sort of syntax, it would sound something like levitate an X-Wing fighter, can Yoda. In other words, Yoda tends to use the syntax that R uses. So if you want to think about how R is written, think about Yoda speak. I guess whether Yoda is adult Yoda or baby Yoda. All right, so what are some objects in the R language? And our first very important object is going to be something that we call an atomic vector, or usually people just refer to it as a vector for short. And so the idea behind a vector is that it's a series of elements. So if you think about a word in the English language, a word is a series of letters. All right, a vector is going to be a series of elements. Now these elements aren't just letters. These elements can be different forms in an atomic vector. So we can have a vector of numbers or a vector of integers. We can have a vector of characters. Characters are one or more letters or other symbols. We can have a vector of factors. These are grouping components. We can even have a vector of logical elements, and logical elements are either true or false. So the general form for creating a vector is that we're going to start with a vector name, so you can give a vector all sorts of names. Then we're going to use an assignment operator. So this is our assignment operator. Sort of looks like a less than and a minus sign put together. You could also use an equal sign if you wanted to. And then we're going to use our C function over here, so C parentheses, start with parentheses at the beginning and the end, and then we're going to combine, think of C as standing for combine, we're going to combine a number of elements. So our first element, our second element, however many elements we eventually have. And elements need to be separated by a comma, and the idea is vectors work a whole lot better if you only have one type of element. So in other words, an element, a vector of numbers is fine, a vector of characters is fine, a vector of logical elements is fine, but it doesn't work quite as well if we try to combine, say, integers with characters. All right, so here's a simple example of how we create a vector. And the most basic form of creating a vector involves simply typing all of the elements individually that we want to put into the vector. So for example, if we wanted to create a vector y, we could say y, use our assignment operator, our combine function over here, C parentheses, and then we just type in the characters 2, 0, 2, 0, sorry, the numbers, and that's our vector. We can also have a vector of characters, so let's create a vector that we're going to call bases. We'll use our assignment operator to say what goes into bases, and we're going to combine some letters. We're going to combine A and T and G and C. And notice when we use characters, we need to close them in commas, whereas if we use numbers, we don't need to do that. So that's an important distinction between numeric elements and character elements in a vector. All right, so these are very short vectors, and it's easy to type each of these by hand, but it's often quite helpful for longer vectors if we have some tricks that save us some time. So in creating a vector full of numbers, for example, one common trick, instead of typing out all the numbers, is if we have a sequence of numbers, for example, a sequence of numbers 1 to 10, we can simply say 1 colon 10, and we get a vector of the numbers from 1 to 10. So let's see what that looks like in R. So I'll come over here to R, and we need a new R script window. So give ourselves a new R script. Notice our global environment is clean. If it wasn't, we'd hit the little broom button over here to remove anything. So let's create our vector S over here. So there's S. Here's our assignment operator, combine function. And in this case, we want S to be the numbers 1 to 10. So there it is. We click on Run next to the line. We see that our vector has been created. It shows up in the environment window over here. Now let's take a look at what is actually in the vector. So we'll type S down here in the console, return, and we see that it has the numbers 1 through 10. All right. We can also, however, use a rep function for either numbers or letters, and that will give us some flexibility in order. So suppose that we wanted to create a vector with purine and pyrimidine, these two terms corresponding to our bases. So A is purine, T is pyrimidine, and so on. But we didn't want to type out purine and pyrimidine over and over again. So what we can do is we can use a function C for rep. Then inside that we include the simplest form of our vector that has the two terms, comma, and then we indicate how many times we want to repeat each of the terms in this particular vector. So let's take a look at what this would look like, our vector B type. So here's our vector B type. Oops. And B type, we're going to use our assignment operator. Rep, we'll start with rep. C, now inside for combine. And first we want a purine. Then we want a pyrimidine. Excuse me. Then we're going to come outside of the C function over here, put in another comma. How many times do we want to repeat this vector? Twice. All right, so we'll run it. We've created the vector B type. To see what's in B type, we'll type B type down here and see that we have purine, pyrimidine. That was our vector repeated twice, purine, pyrimidine. So we now have 4 integers in our B type vector. Sorry, 4 characters in our B type vector over here. Purine, pyrimidine, purine, pyrimidine. Okay, but suppose that's not quite what we wanted. Suppose we wanted purine to appear twice and pyrimidine to appear twice. How could we do that? So let's create another vector B type 2 over here. Use our assignment operator again and our rep function again. And again, we're going to start with the same basic vector inside. Purine is going to be 1 character element. Pyrimidine is going to be the other. All right. But now, how should we repeat these? And instead of repeating this vector twice, we're going to repeat each element twice. We're going to say each equals 2. So if we run this, here's our vector B type 2. What does that look like? We see that purine now appears twice, followed by pyrimidine twice. So this can be a really powerful tool for creating a vector that has lots of numbers or lots of terms of various kinds, and we don't have to repeat them over and over again. Okay. One other important characteristic in creating a vector is not to accidentally create a vector. And believe it or not, it can be somewhat easy to accidentally create or overwrite a vector. So remember our vector y up here with the numbers 2, 0, 2, 0. If we forget that y is already created, we might accidentally create or redefine y and give it another set of terms. In other words, we erase y and redefine it. And we want to be careful not to do that unless we really intend to do it. So if we accidentally said y equals, and then we used the numbers 2, 0, 1, 9 by mistake. Before I run it, notice that so we can create a new vector unintentionally. So now if we did this, y would be 2019 instead of 2020. Okay, so here's a practice opportunity for you. Create the following vectors. First, one with the letters of your first name, a second one with the letters of your last name. Then create a vector that has the number for each letter of your name. So for example, if your first name has 3 letters, create a vector that has the numbers 1, 2, and 3, etc. Okay, and then create a vector that has the word first for each letter in your first name. So if your first name had 3 letters, first would be your vector. And if your last name had 4 letters in it, for example, then you create another vector with last. All right, I will pause for a second to give you a chance to practice, and then we'll take a look at how this is done. All right, welcome back. Let's see how we can do this. So first of all, how would we create a vector with letters in our name? We'll create a vector called first, for first name over here. Give it assignment operator. C combine, and if I want to use my name, it's I am over there. And for my last name, I can create a last vector over here. C, this is going to take a bit longer. E, R, I, F, F, I, T, T, H. All right. So this should give me 2 vectors over here, first and last. First and last. Okay. Next thing on our list. We want to create vectors that have numbers for each letter in your name. All right. So my first name has 3 letters, so I'm going to create a vector called first num over here for first number. And I don't want to type, I could type out 1, 2, 3. That's not so bad. Okay. But let's suppose I don't want to do all that typing for the numbers in my last name. That's a bit longer. So I'll create a vector last num over here, C, and the way I could save myself some time is do 1:8, and that's going to give me consecutively the numbers from 1 to 8. All right, and there it is. So for our last num vector, I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. All right. Next on our list, what we want to do is create a vector that has the word first for each letter in your first name and last for each letter in your last name. So this is going to be a good opportunity to use the rep function because we're going to get real tired of writing first and last in a hurry. So let's create a new vector, first over here, and we're going to use our rep function. Then what's the vector that we want to repeat? So let's type that, and we just want to use the word first repeated many times. So that was a simple vector to make, and we want to use that 3 times. All right, so that gives us a vector first. Let's see what it looks like down here. Yep, it has the word first 3 times. And we can do the same thing for the last name. Last, assignment operator, rep, which we want to repeat, a vector, what's in the vector, the word last, make sure it's in quotes, close our vector. How many times do we want it? I have 8 letters in my last name, so I'm going to repeat it 8 times. There we go. We want to see what last looks like. We can do that. Okay, now a couple of other little notes over here just to see how all this goes together. We can create vectors from existing vectors. So suppose, for example, that I want to combine the letters in my first and last name. I'm going to create a first vector and a last vector. over here, assignment operator, C vector, we're going to have first, comma, last. So this is the vector for my first letters, this is the vector for my last letters. Run this, and there we go. If we look at first, last, there it is. Okay? And now, suppose that I wanted to combine, so have a first word appear for each letter of my first name and a last appear for each letter of my last name. I could do that by combining vectors or using the rep function. So I'm going to say first, last, and letters over here for letters. All right, rep. What am I repeating? A vector. What's in the vector? The word first and the word last. Okay. All right. Now I want first to appear 3 times. I want last to appear 8 times. So I can put that as another vector over here for my repeating part of the function. 3, comma, 8. And so what that does, let me run it. Let's take a look at first and last. Last letters over here. First, 3 times. Last 8 times for each letter in my last name. All right, so hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of how we can use R to create vectors. So the key skills to make sure you can create a vector with a series of individual elements and create vectors by repeating a vector or elements in each vector. Create a vector by repeating a vector of the elements in each vector. My apologies for the typo.